Tomorrow at the Intra-Africa Trade Roundtable, the Minister of Trade and Industry, or DTI, Dr. Rob Davies, will launch Trade Africa, a predecessor to the Africa Export Council, a unit established within the DTI to promote South Africa's trade relations within the continent. The launch will incorporate the guidelines for good business practice by South African companies operating in the rest of Africa. From our Pretoria studio, we are joined by Xolelwa Mlumbi-Peter. She is the Deputy Director General for International Trade and Economic Development Unit at the Department of Trade and Industry. How do you fit that all in your business card? It's good to have you on the program. Thanks for being our guest on Morning Live.
Morning, Leanne.
Good morning to you. All right, so it certainly is an interesting week to have dialogue with reports that South African businesses operating in South Sudan are going through uncertainty because of the fighting. Before we go any further into the interview, can you update us on that situation?
Well, the aim really of the Trade Africa initiative, Leanne, is to deal with such issues and to assist the private sector whenever they're experiencing challenges in trading with the rest of the continent. So what we try and do as government is to provide the necessary support to deal with any trade and non-tariff barriers facing South African companies. So the Trade Africa initiative is one of those initiatives that will ensure that there's efficiency in government response in supporting the private sector, regardless of where they are in the continent.
Why is there a need for a dedicated unit responsible for driving South Africa's export of goods and services?
Well, firstly, I think it is important to indicate that this is in support of government's approach to regional economic integration, which is based on a development integration agenda that has three pillars: market integration through the negotiation of FTAs, industrial development is the second pillar, and lastly, infrastructure development. So there is a need to ensure that we have a coordinated South Africa approach to implement the regional integration agenda.
Yeah.
So the Trade Africa initiative will therefore support the private sector in terms of outward investment into industrial as well as infrastructure projects. It will support the private sector to take advantage of market access opportunities that exist as a result of the trade agreements that we have negotiated and South Africa is party to. This would include SACU, the SADC Trade Protocol, but also the tripartite free trade area that is currently under negotiation. So the dedicated unit is therefore required to ensure that we are able to provide access to capital to support our companies when they are accessing the rest of the African market, but also we support our private sector in terms of non-financial support related to market intelligence research, but also to provide a platform for dialogue between the private sector as well as government in terms of how we can, as I said, promote efficiency in the processes that we put in place to support our private sector to access the Africa market.
Just very quickly, we don't have much time. First question, I'm going to ask you two in one, and perhaps you can just answer it. Why the name change from Africa Export Council? And then secondly, just talk to us about the guidelines that are going to be unveiled tomorrow. What changes? How will the DTI be able to enforce these outside of our borders as well?
The name change from the Africa Export Council to the Trade Africa Initiative was informed by the value proposition, because it's not only about promoting South African exports. Yes, what we are trying to do is to promote value-added exports into the African market, but most importantly, we are also trying to promote sourcing relations between South Africa and the rest of the continent, which would mean sourcing products from the rest of the continent into the South African market as well in promotion of intra-Africa trade. So that is what has informed the name change. In terms of the guidelines of good business practice for South African companies that are operating in the rest of the continent, the aim here really is to ensure that aligned to the development integration agenda, we are able to provide guiding framework for the private sector in terms of what is expected as good business conduct when it comes to operating in the rest of the continent. The aim here is to come up with a set of principles that are aimed at promoting the development of regional value chains in support of the industrial work program, but also promoting corporate social responsibility. We're encouraging our private sector to ensure that they implement environmentally sound business practices as well. Right. So again, the initiative around the guidelines on good business practice is in support of the regional economic integration agenda.
All right, let's leave it there for this morning. Good luck with it all. Thanks so much for talking to us. Xolelwa Mlumbi-Peter is the Deputy Director General for International Trade and Economic Development Unit at the Department of Trade and Industry.